Hey everyone, and welcome to this special edition of DEI After 5 Live. So we're actually not after 5. Hopefully it's noon for you all on the East Coast and 9 a.m. on the West Coast and everything in between for everyone else around the world. So welcome. My name is Sasha Thompson. I am the founder of the Equity Equation and the host of DEI After 5. Today, we are diving into a topic that I think should be on the top of everyone's mind, but especially those that are in human resources, as the new administration has made promises that will impact the workplace. And so today, my guest is Celeste Thompson, who is the founder and CPO of Tribe HR Consulting. So same last name. We don't know if we're related quite yet, but we're still trying to figure that out. So Celeste, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Sasha. So nice to see you.
So for those who, know how I do this DEI After 5, the first question I always ask folks is, tell us about yourself. How did you get into this work? And then we'll just kind of dive in.
Totally. Sounds good. Um, Gosh, how did I get into this work? It has been a million years. I always say I've been in human resources out of the womb, if that's possible. And, I happened upon this work when I was in a business fraternity in college. And I remember someone saying, hey, I heard about an organization or company needing someone in human resources. At that time, I had no idea what human resources even was, but I went in and I started working in the payroll department, and the rest was history. And from then, I loved human resources. I feel like there's a saying that I love that comes from the Bible. It says, may your gift make room for you.
Hmm.
And I felt like I found my gift. And yeah, the rest is history. I've worked in HR in many industries. My preference is to be industry agnostic. I feel like I know my craft. I consider myself an expert in human resources, but not every industry. So I actually find a lot of joy in going into new industries and understanding their landscape, challenges, and pain points. And, I started Tribe in 2018, and then I paused for a bit and went back to a corporate function. But I restarted the business a few months ago, and the focus is really small businesses under 200 employees. And my thought was, how do I sort of give small businesses large company expertise, right? Because they may not get the same type of expertise that larger organizations get from an HR standpoint or any other standpoint. So that's what I've been up to. And I'm happy to say that Tribe is up and running and really focusing on just great companies and small businesses anywhere from, 2 to 200 people who maybe don't have an HR infrastructure, are in need of HR guidance. I have a toolkit that I love to share, and just really being a coach and a guide to company leaders around human capital.
Love it. So, before we dive in, I do want to let folks know that if you are tuning in, there's a QR code. Scan that code. And that will do is it will help us capture your name and email so that we can follow up with additional information as things start to unfold and become a bit more clearer in this space, that we will keep you abreast of what is happening, what we see that is happening in this space, because this is truly going to be a transition that is going to impact all of us, regardless of, as Celeste said, the size of your organization. So I do want to point out that QR code for everyone. So Celeste, I want to dive right in because, as we were preparing for this, you created like this list of these are the things that HR needs to think about. And as I was going through it, I'm like, oh my goodness. Like these are some of these things I thought about just because of the work that I do,
Yes.
but I'm not an HR professional, right? So there were some nuanced pieces that I didn't even consider or thought about, but then was like, but I don't even know what that would look like. So I want to start tackling some of these. So the first one that comes to mind, or that I want to talk about, are healthcare benefits, right? So
Mhm.
there's now this threat that the ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, however folks want to call it, could be on the chopping block. How could that impact what organizations do as it relates to human resources?
Yeah. So the ACA, Obamacare came about, gosh, years, 10 years, over 10 years ago. And some thought of it as an equivalent to socialized medicine, right? Or healthcare, sorry.
Mhm.
And what it really has done for HR teams is there's a complexity in administration of employee benefits that people may not realize. Employee benefits leaders and total rewards leaders do it so well and so seamlessly that people don't realize what really goes into the offering of health, vision, dental, et cetera, benefits. And when the ACA came about, what was required is that all organizations submit data around how many of their employees are covered and how many of their employees are not covered under their health benefits plans. And with that data, what the government does is looks at the full population and those who are fully covered and those who are not. And it will allow you, so if you go into an organization and you say, hey, I'm an individual, I am interested in health insurance, and you look at the cost of your employer's health insurance, sometimes it can be, costly, right? And that there are lots of factors that go into the premiums of health insurance, and it differs by organization. But if you decide to sign up for your employer's health insurance, some people might say, you know what, I'm now going to go on the marketplace, which is the ACA benefits, and choose my health insurance rather than choosing what my employer is offering because the cost is too high with my
Mhm.
employer. So it gives people a fuller, options of what they can do. And then what it also does, the ACA brought about, is that you can no longer deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. I'm a breast cancer survivor, 10 years, and that's a pre-existing condition. So if someone like myself, who's self-employed and who's, gone on the marketplace to get insurance, that may have not been the case before. Like, where would I go? I may be denied by insurance companies because I've had this pre-existing condition of breast cancer. So, I don't have the numbers as far as the ACA and how many people it's covering to date, but it is millions of people who are covered.
Yeah, I think the last number I saw was close to 45 million. That might not be accurate, but I remember it being somewhere around there that it will impact. And I'm glad that you pointed out that this is not just for folks that are underinsured or are self employed. There
That's
are
right.
people that are working in our organizations that choose to go to the Affordable Care Act or use that marketplace option because it's more affordable than what organizations are offering. So I'm glad
Right.
that you pointed that out because this is something now organizations will need to take into consideration as they are moving forward and wanting to retain talent
That's
because
right.
benefits, right? Those benefits can make or break a decision in someone
In
coming to the
someone's right.
organization.
And there's one other factor, I wanted to mention. When you are insured by your company's insurance, there's something called an experience rating. So each company, and when I go into organizations as head of HR, I tend to work with the insurance brokers in looking at the experience rating. So let's say I come from the fashion industry, the beauty industry, heavily female organizations. So what do you have in those industries? A lot of pregnancies, right?
Mhm.
So the experience rating in a company that is very female heavy may be very different from a company that is not, right? And those experience ratings basically impact the premiums or the cost of healthcare for the company, right? So if you now take the ACA out of the equation, you've got everyone back on the health insurance of the company, which, if you have lots of cancer diagnoses, you have lots of, illnesses and ailments. That's why well-being is so important nowadays in the work of HR. But that shifts, right, for the company. And I'll tell you, I hold an HR budget, and health insurance is one of the top costs of HR that we facilitate. So it's not going to change. The costs have been rising astronomically year after year, and there will be a great impact here.
Thank you. So one of the other ones that has come just really in the forefront, and I'll say it this way, in that, I happen to be in the state of Maryland, where we are feeling somewhat protected from a state level. But some of the promises of the new administration really is coming after undocumented workers, right?
Right.
And so the immigration policy shifts that are going to be taking place. It's been an interesting conversation because for some organizations, they're like, oh, well, this doesn't impact us because our employees are all documented. However, that does not take into consideration the the totality of people's lives. And so they may have family members that are impacted. They may have other people in their communities that are impacted. So talk to me a little bit about what these immigration policies can mean for organizations, and what does that look like in that broader picture?
Right. Yeah, I feel, look, talent acquisition is a big part of my competency. I love it. I have always loved it. It's tough. It's a beast. And I have two really interesting examples. One is something that I heard recently about eggs, right? And eggs came up a lot in the context of groceries and the cost of groceries, and eggs are super expensive. I love a hard-boiled egg in the morning, but it came up as a pain point for people, and things that the population are struggling with as far as feeding families, et cetera. And someone who has been a farmer and in the business of egg production for many years talked about the fact that in the United States, most of people, or the people who work in that business, are undocumented, right? And the reason that people are undocumented in certain industries is really it's a byproduct of so many different things. So if, let's say, we were going to say egg production, and you're going to take away everyone who's undocumented. Now, I believe people should be documented. I mean, I'm in HR. That's what we do, right? We enforce policy. But if you take away that population, now let's say everyone in that group of workers was making an average of $5.15 an hour. Let's say that, right? If you're in New York, it's $15. Let's say they were even making $15 an hour, but I sincerely doubt that as far as a minimum wage. And you now have that group gone, and you have to recruit others. Where are you going to find the skills you might find in very, very low volume? You have to then put money into training, right? Because that takes time to onboard, to train about what they need to do to farm and retain the eggs, et cetera. And then you have to pay them more. So now that farm and that business that's been paying people an average, and I don't think they've been intentionally saying lowballing people. They're paying them what these individuals are, I'm coming from said country, and I've been only making an equivalent of $20,000 a year. Now I'm making $30,000 here. So that actually helps me, in a better way. So there's that, right? So where are you sourcing the talent now? And then do you have the money to cover the increased payroll that you're going to have now for just domestic workers, right?
Mhm.
Another one is I worked in the fashion industry. Eileen Fisher, one of the most amazing women I know, the company, I worked there for 14 years. And she was very, very passionate about sustainability and made in the USA, right? So there were US factories that we used, and she actually built a factory in Irvington, New York from scratch. And
Mhm.
I was part of the team. There was a sort of task force as part of it, and my role was all the HRing, right? So, and also the talent acquisition. We wanted to create a sample room, which we already had one in Irvington, New York. So we needed seamstresses and sample makers. I scoured the earth to find seamstress and sample makers.
Yeah.
Inherently, those come from Eastern European countries, Italy as well, ateliers, people who've been, that skill set had been handed down generationally. Um,
Right.
I remember when FIT took pattern making as a course out of their curriculum. So where did we find the people? We barely could.
Yeah. You had to go out. Right.
And we
Absolutely.
had to create our own training program for pattern making. And that cost us a lot of time and a lot of money, but we had it at that
Hmm.
time, right? What if you didn't have it? And who has the bandwidth to do that, right? In this day and time. So those are examples of what happens, right? When you're taking a pool of people out of the workforce and saying, okay, well, they're gone. Let's start hiring, American workers. They're not doing that. They're not teaching
Right.
it in schools, right?
Right.
So we go back to the education of it. That's also a factor.
I was just going to say that it's very interesting to me, and as someone who came, I have a master's in higher education administration, so
Yeah.
I'm staying very closely connected to what's happening in that space. But to that point, we are not teaching those skills. I will even say from K-12 through college,
Yeah.
um, that the workplace actually needs. And so, what I'm hearing is organizations may need to create programs to upskill, reskill people just to do some of the basics that is required for that particular industry.
That's right.
So again, that's more funding that would need to come out in order to do that and to prepare the workforce in ways that they've not had to before. And the other thing that was tied into what you were saying is, where are you getting the talent?
Mhm.
And where that leads me is to some of these DEI efforts that are being dismantled, pulled apart. Um, we all know that the research has shown time and time again that organizations that are more diverse um, have a larger bottom line, right? They're more innovative. We can go into that. That's a whole other topic for another
Yes.
day. But it all ties back to this talent acquisition. And, one of the things that I was keenly aware of, and just again, some of the work that I've done through the years at other organizations, is, where are you sourcing the talent, right?
Mhm.
Where are you getting this talent? And, you know, again, I worked for the GMAT for several years. And so I worked with organizations that were focused specifically on business education. And
Right.
so, there were organizations like the PhD Project and National Society of Hispanic Engineers and National Black MBA and all of these organizations that have this amazing talent that have gone to these schools.
Right.
But then when it comes to placement in these organizations, there is limited access that happens. And some of these organizations just check the boxes that they've gone to these places without actually doing the work to ensure that people feel valued, seen, heard, and connected once they're there.
Right.
So, with this pull for DEI to go away, the need for the tenets of DEI are still going to be, if not more important, moving forward. And so, what are you seeing kind of in that space too, of we're being pulled, and I'll, excuse me, I'll caveat that. And I saw a report this morning that 48% of organizations say they're doubling down on their DEI efforts, regardless of what happens in this administration. That is actually down from the 56% that was done in the last survey, which I think was about 6 months ago, 6 to 9 months ago. So when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what's coming down from Project 2025 or this new administration, what are some of the things that organizations need to keep in mind?
Wow.
That was a loaded
Well,
question. I know.
that was a
I'm
big one.
sorry.
That's okay. I think that, gosh, DEI is something that, I've lived my entire career. I've been doing DEI work, obviously out of the womb because I am DEI, right? I'm a woman of
Yeah.
color, Black woman, and so I have, it's always been top of mind. And earlier in my career, I was the only, for the most part, in my profession, and it was so beautiful to see such a wide array of people, genders, and races in human resources as I progressed in my career. So I love that. Yeah, and I think as far as the policies, my philosophy around DEI and the way I've always worked around it is, it's something that I've built into the fabric of the work of HR that I do. It's not necessarily a department, it's not a person, it's not, a thing. It is supposed to be part of what HR does and how HR shows up, right? And unfortunately, I think the limiting piece of DEI is the education around it, what it is and what it is not, right? And I think it's really, really important for people to understand and educate themselves as to why this is even a factor, right? Not just a sort of tool or mechanism to overlook one group and highlight another. I think it's really, really important to understand the origin. And I do DEI training as well. And my DEI training is sort of like really intense because it goes through this whole sort of origin story. So I think from a talent acquisition perspective, my philosophy was never like, if you are interested in just hiring more Black and brown people into your organization by numbers, I'm not your girl. I have no interest in that, right?
Yeah.
I want people who are qualified. I have high standards for myself and my team. I am a nurturer, developer, and I want people who are on board with that regardless of what they look like, right? And look, one thing you think about too, as far as DEI, is ageism that
Yeah.
exists in the world right now today.
Absolutely.
We've got 5 generations working together, right? And what I see is there should be more cross pollination of all of those generations of people. The baby boomers, as annoying as they can be, I'm an Xer, we need them. We don't want them to leave because they hold so much knowledge. But guess what? The X's are the workhorses. We are most of the managers right now, the people who are holding the whole. So there's so much that we're doing as far as moving the company and the work forward. So anyway, back to DEI, I see it as a broader context, not just race, not just gender. It's age, it's generation, it's competency, right? In my career, I've worked for very creative organizations and I've worked for very left-brained organizations as well. So when I think about the differentiators there too, it's like scientists as opposed to designers, right? There's diversity in that. So
Yes.
I think if we can start, opening up the conversation and the language around what DEI is and what it isn't, maybe it won't be so much of a boogeyman, right? Because I feel like that's what's happened. So much. I see some comments. Thank you. And the font is so nice and big. I can actually see it.
Yeah, but and I'm glad you said that, and this speaks to Dominic's point too. That's why we created DEI After 5, because it is these conversations, and we are looking at this from so many different perspectives because there's diversity in diversity, and
Yes.
so understanding the impacts that this could have, not just in the workplace, but in our lives, in our communities, all of these things, and so it is not what is happening, especially around the promises of the administration, the incoming administration, aren't just going to impact the workplace. We're focusing on the workplace, but it means so much more because there are individuals that are mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and aunties and all of that that are in our organizations, and they will be impacted inside and outside of the
That's right.
organization in some way, right?
That's
So
right.
that's why we're having this conversation. I want
And I wanted
to,
to say one more
yep.
thing, Sasha.
Mhm.
There's also a component. Culture is a big part of what I do. I've worked for very mission-driven and culture-driven brands, and I really help to sort of operationalize culture. It's one of my skill sets. And that too is something that has really been interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
when you think about culture, sometimes you can think about, creating, what's the root word? Cult, right? In your organization. Everyone walks the same and talks the same and thinks the same and is aligned the same. My business is called Tribe because Tribe inherently has attributes to it: shared values, shared vision, right? Shared focus. There's a collaboration rooted in that, right? People move together as one, a unit. Now, you can do that, but you don't have to have everyone look the same, walk the same, and
Right.
talk the same, right? So culture sometimes gets confused, or people confuse culture by everything needs to be just like me. So when I recruit people, I overlook those people who may be more left brained as opposed to they are maybe more right brained in an organization. The
Yeah.
beauty of bringing them into the fold is that they are aligned with what? The values, right?
Yeah.
And the mission and the goals, the intersectional impact. That's right, Toki. It's all of that. So I think it's really important, again, for that education and really opening up DEI and really understanding the impact and the value of it. It's so amazing. So I'm
Yeah.
really sad to see, and I hope that it just doesn't fall at the wayside because people have pause around being a part of something that isn't, really looked positively upon. We've got to
Yeah,
be
I mean, it goes
clear.
back to, and I've said it several times, right? People say, "Oh, I want a cultural fit." That's exactly what you were saying. It's the cookie cutter. It's the status quo. Innovation happens with the diversity of ideas and thoughts and experiences. And so you want someone that's going to be able to add to that culture, that's going to push you to do something greater and better. And so it is really a shifting of mindset
Yeah,
of what are we missing in our organization that we need. And that's what you're recruiting for, right? What are
absolutely.
you missing? And
What
it's
do you
not just the skill
mean?
set, it is those experiences, it's those attitudes, it's those cultural nuances, right? I had a professor that would talk about, how do you interweave all of this into a cultural milieu? And I was like, ooh, I like that word.
Ooh,
And
I
it's
like
kind of
that. Yeah.
stuck with me because it is a tapestry, right? How do you bring all of these different things together to create this tapestry that is your organization? And so I love that. I want to do a little bit of a turn because, one of the things that has come up that I've noticed is this pull, um, in reading Project 2025, this pull from whistleblowers, right?
Mhm.
And employee protections. And so the work I do is around psychological safety.
Yes.
Excuse me. I've been working closely with the end workplace um, abuse group to really ensure that employees have rights and privileges and they're not mistreated in the workplace. And I can share more information about that or connect anyone who's interested to that. But talk to us about what this looks like, right? So if these whistleblower policies can be taken away, or what is the greater impact of that in our organizations?
Right. And the work you do around psychological safety, I think, is really great. I think it's undervalued, and not widely understood, right? So I think you have lots of opportunity there too. Um, you know, the Department of Labor is the governing body for HR. Okay, they're the body that focuses on the policies, the regulations by which we support the human capital in an organization. And one of the things that Project 2025 is saying is to get rid of the Department of Labor. So most of the work that we do in HR as far as policy starts with federal, then you have state, and then you have local. Now, I tend to work in organizations that are multi-unit. So I've been in 25 states, 35 states. So when I create policy, and countries as well at the same time. So when
Right.
I create policies, I have to look at what the federal government is saying to me, what the state is saying to me, and then what said country is requesting as well. So there's a lot of nuance and even actualizing. When you look at a handbook, ask any HR person, it's I want to fake my own death most of the time when you think about a handbook, but because what goes into the creation of that is massive.
Yeah.
In 2022, 2023, and this year, there were something like 40 different laws that HR professionals had to really look at, take pause around because they were coming from federal, state, or local, right? To say, hey, do we have to implement this or do we not? The threshold back in the day used to be, oh, 100 employees or more. Now it's like you have any employees, you need to be looking at this, right? So a lot of what I do too, even with smaller companies, is going in to make sure that they're compliant in all of these things and ticking all of the boxes. And this facilitation or dictation comes from the Department of Labor. So when you talk about whistleblower laws, when you talk about harassment training, I think 25 states and counting are requiring harassment training for organizations. Those things would just fall at the wayside.
Yeah.
Why would I ever come forward to say, one, that, I see there's something unethical happening in the workplace? Sometimes I work for companies that have ethics lines, right? You can call up, you can leave a message, you can email, and nondescript. It's sort of what do you call it? Confidential, right?
Right.
And you can tell what happens. I would partner with the head of ethics, and she would give me, sort of data around what was coming from each market, right? And it wasn't a lot, especially in the U.S., because
Yeah.
people, not that I was looking for unethical things to come to the forefront, but my thought was, even with whistleblower policies in place, people still had pause around it,
Yeah.
because people think about ethics, they think about HR as the police. I fight with my family all the time about that. They're like, oh, you guys are just the enforcement, you're the principal. No, I'm the truth
Mhm.
advocate. That's what I do. I look for the truth and I support where the support is needed, if that's on the company side or that's on the employee side. And I would hope that most HR practitioners operate in that
Well, I
context.
was just going to say that is a great point because, I have been known to say some not so nice things about HR, and I have my friends are in HR, right? So, but again, part of that is I've seen that distinction in the friends that I have that do this work are like you, in that they look at it from this humanistic standpoint.
Yes.
My experience being in a workplace, it has been
Yeah.
weaponized against me. And so
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is there's a lack of trust in the process, which again
That's
ties
right.
back to psychological safety and all of that. So if these whistleblower advocates or processes go away, right, there's going to feel like there's absolutely no protection for the employee in the workplace. And it is not lost on me that the head of SHRM is on that short list of being tapped to run labor
Boy,
after they have come out to say that they wanted to remove equity from DEI, right? So you're going to remove equity. Those of us that are in this space know like none of this stuff works without the equity piece.
that's right.
And then to put Johnny Taylor as, oh, he could lead labor, problematic in so many ways, but that's a whole other conversation and we don't have enough time.
No,
And I
many.
think I need to do that after 5 with a
That's
drink.
another conversation, and I'm like rubbing my hands together because I'd love to get into that one. I
Yeah.
not today, but
But so as organizations are thinking about, retaliation and not having these safety nets in place and already knowing that they're battling with a trust factor with some HR organizations, right? There needs to be a rethink of this. I
I
absolutely think, psychological safety is going to be key in across the board in all of this. But a
that's
lot of
right.
that is going to be, and you and I, briefly talked about this, is are your policies and procedures set up so that people feel psychologically safe even going through them? Because if
I mean,
that's
let
not
me
in
let me
place,
tell you,
yes,
people want a framework,
they want a
right?
framework.
They want rails. And I have heard that loud and clear. I am telling you, and most recently, I have heard that loud and clear, and from young people, right? Our Z's. They are sort of like, give me the guardrails by which I operate. People need an operating model. This is your first job. Your
Yeah.
second job, you don't know what you don't know. How do we know how to operate in the context of work?
Yeah.
So I think these policies and these frameworks and these guardrails really help people to, be able to something to hold on to, right? They're
Yeah.
not everything. This is something that the HR team needs to actualize. The book is just the handbook is just the handbook. The policy is just the policy. It's the people and how they foster, advocate,
Right.
and create safe spaces for people to bring things to the forefront, right? And when
Yeah.
you're new into the workforce, you don't even know what you don't know. Can I say that? Should I do that? I don't know. I have a 26-year-old son. He has a mother who's in HR, so he had a head start on
Right.
what I should say and what I shouldn't say and what I should do and what I shouldn't do. But not everyone has that. Can you Google
Yeah.
it? Sure, but is that really giving them all that they need? So I've heard individuals come to me and say, I didn't even know that that constituted harassment. Like,
Right.
I didn't know. So when we did a huge sexual harassment and harassment training, recently, Soul Cycle, where I was, people were sort of like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we were sort of like, wow, this is shocking. People are thanking us for doing trainings. And it's like, because I didn't know,
Yeah.
right? So there's the going back to that sort of education piece, right? And then to your point about the psychological safety, say you're working in a company that doesn't have a deep sense of psychological safety, or culture that you can even articulate or identify. How do you know what is right and what is not right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you don't know that, if something happens, you're not even sure that that is something that you should be bringing to the forefront. So
Yeah.
I think there's just so much rooted in it. It's not just about, there's, HR is an iceberg, the iceberg effect, where the things that you see up here are just a small snippet of what we do.
What's underneath?
Everything lies
Absolutely.
beneath, right? It's the
Absolutely.
complexity of human capital, and it's so complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so those things will be, HR will have to hold that differently. And how, right? What are you putting in place now that really
Mhm.
allows for people to feel that safety and to speak up around things? How do you make good companies great?
Yeah.
Those are,
But you're making an excellent point in it's the actualization of that,
yes.
right? I always say that company culture is not what's written on the cafeteria wall. It is what people experience every single day. And that
It's what you pay
trust,
attention to.
right? And that trust also comes from, are your actions aligning with your words? And so, to your
Right.
point around what is in that handbook, that means nothing unless it's actualized. What are people experiencing every single day? Are they, and I've experienced this myself, right? Are they seeing someone that's not being held accountable, that is acting the fool, that is causing all kinds of issues and challenges, and they're not being held accountable? There's a lack of trust that's going to be in that organization if you say this is the behavior that is not acceptable, and we see it every single day being accepted.
Ah,
So
and the
I,
four-letter
yeah,
word, I'm
uh-huh.
sorry, so I should have cut you off. Accountable. Accountability.
Accountable. I have
That
a
is a four-letter word these days. I
let me,
mean,
oh my gosh, that's a whole thing. It's so funny. I had a conversation yesterday about accountability. Um, Someone tagged me in a post this morning about a post I did yesterday about accountability. So my next blog post is going to be on about accountability, and what that looks like in a psychologically safe space, because
okay.
it is, I think we need to flip accountability on its head and not look at it as punishment, but as an opportunity to learn and grow. And so,
Oh
yeah,
my
there's a
God,
whole other
it
thing
is
there.
so, and we should totally take that away because I would love to. The accountability, right? It has a negative
Oh, yes.
connotation, and I don't know how that happened, right? And
Mhm.
it's not. It's
Yeah.
not. And it does, it's rooted in the trust and the psychological safety. It all is part of the same coin.
Yeah, and
So
it's punishment. And I saw Toki, I saw your comment just now around psychological safety needs a DEI lens.
yes.
Listen, y'all stay tuned. Go to the QR code, scan it, because I got something coming out that is going to be announced very soon, that ties in psychological safety, inclusion, and identity, because this is what is missing in this
Woo,
conversation.
can't wait.
And it is something that organizations are going to need, especially with this new administration coming in. We can no longer ignore how people are showing up in this space. And so this is why we're having this conversation. HR needs to be prepared, because HR, y'all are going to be on the front lines of
Oh my
what
God.
needs to change and shift within these organizations. I am looking mindful at the time. There's just so much that we need to take into consideration.
I
Um,
know. Can we talk about wages, law, labor law?
yes, that's exactly where I was going to go next,
Oh,
because, whew,
God.
yeah, we kind of touched on it a little bit.
A little bit. It's a huge one, right? Because Project 2025 talks about regulations as far as overtime, union
Mm,
rights, et cetera. And look, it's a big one.
yeah.
I think one of the things I've heard that even aside from Project 2025, this administration is putting into play is the tax benefits. And one of the tax benefits is really interesting because if you look at the workforce that is sort of in the more food and beverage industry, right? Very, very complicated, maybe other hospitality industries as well, where you have a very low wage and you get benefits, right? You get tips and all these things, and the thought is right that we won't be taxing those moving forward, but people have to really think about the whole, right? Because if you're not taxing those benefits, then you're not paying into Social Security. So if
Mhm.
you're not paying into Social Security, then you're getting less money at the end.
Yeah.
So it's almost like front loading you. But in the back end, when I'm 65 and I'm sitting there like, I need every shekel that I can get, you have less because you front loaded that money. You've got it
Yeah.
now. Now,
Yeah.
if you are forward thinking enough to say, I'm going to invest it when I get it, I'm going to do all of these other things, that may be a really good thing, but not everyone's going to be there. So education, again, is going to be really important from an HR standpoint. Hey, Joe, you're making more money, but this is what you should be thinking about, right? So financial acumen and education around that. Overtime. Oh my God. If I go back to, I'm going to nerd out and bore everyone with the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, which is another HR pain point, right? So recently, the threshold by which someone earns overtime was increased, which is a big deal, right? And then it was struck down by local courts. You've had Texas that struck it down recently, and everyone's talking about these overtime regulations. Overtime is massive. Like, I don't know if people realize, but there are people who work overtime as part of their livelihood. Like, it is
Mhm.
their built into what their income. It's
Yeah.
not like once a year, twice a year, oh, during Christmas or holidays, I work overtime. No, it's like my base salary is $50,000 a year and I bring home 100 grand every single year because of what? Overtime. And
Yeah.
those are a lot of people in civil service roles, right?
Time and a half. Yeah.
Pilot, cops,
Holidays. Yep. Yep.
longshoremen, all of these jobs you're thinking about, but this is overtime, and taking that away, it's sort of like, now it does cost the company. It should be monitored. HR is responsible and accountable for that. You need to pay people fair wages so they can live and they don't abuse overtime. So there are other things that need to be done attached to that, but
Mhm.
to remove it, in itself, it is frankly, it's frightening for
Yeah.
some industries and some roles.
And I think, and this was part of the marketing tactics, it wasn't clear on the
Mhm.
impact this could have, right? Many
Right.
organizations now are saying or considering, you know what, we're not going to offer overtime anymore. We may offer you a little bit more in salary, but they're crunching the numbers, and what they would be offering you in salary would be far less than you would be making in overtime. And so if they take overtime away and they'll increase your salary a bit, they're saving money, right? And so you have to think of, is this really beneficial to me in the long run?
Yes,
So these are the things that were not communicated clearly, um, by
it's not.
design,
And look, as
by
an
design
yes,
in the process. Yeah.
and as an HR practitioner, it's something we do all the time, right? Because Sasha, if you make $25 an hour, that's like $52,000 a year, right? And I say, so you're making $25 an hour, you're an hourly individual working in a company, you work an average of 10 hours overtime a week. That's taking your 30 to $35 an hour, right?
Yeah.
It's taking you, right, time and a half, whatever. I'm not going to do the calculation. But now, if you say, I say, Sasha, your responsibilities have changed. Now, the FLSA, what it does is it looks like at the classification of an individual. Now,
Yeah.
people think HR just decides, oh, you're hourly and your salary. There's a methodology that we have to go through to decide whether a job is hourly or salary, right? So, say I promote Sasha now, and she's in a $25 an hour role. She works 10 hours overtime every week. And then now I have to decide what I'm going to pay Sasha. So I might say, oh, you know what? I'm going to pay her $60,000 a year because she's at 52,000 for that $25 an hour. But no, what HR does, you have to go look at all of your overtime, the
Hmm.
average of that. And then guess what? There's a look back period, usually 12 weeks that you're using. And we'll say, wait a minute, Sasha actually makes $70,000 a year, but I'm promoting her and the salary range for that doesn't even, fit into that. So a
Hmm.
lot of the work that we do is figuring those things out, understanding maybe her salary was too low to begin with. Maybe we need to look at things. So it triggers a whole lot of different things. And
Hmm.
when you go into an organization new as a HR leader like myself, a lot of the things I do is audit and unpack that stuff to make sure that everyone is paid equitably. And overtime isn't being abused, but it is there. It is a
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah. But you made a great point, right? This is an opportunity to look at pay equity, right?
It's an
For
opportunity.
organizations that may have been struggling and grappling in this space so that, it's fair and equitable and people are getting what they should be getting for the same jobs, same types of jobs, etc. Right. So
That's
I
another
love that you
thing.
brought that up.
That's
One of
another
the
thing,
other things.
Sasha, that is wanting to go at the wayside, right? Equity
Hmm.
in pay. That would
Oh
go
yeah.
away
They want to get
because
rid of
that
that. Yeah.
the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which was passed during the Obama administration, looked at equity in pay. Women
Hmm.
still make what, 62 cents for every dollar that a male makes? Shock
Yeah.
horror. It's real,
Yeah.
right? And so when you look at that equity, something that came into play was pay transparency. So this is why you see pay on every job application out there, because what that act did was said that minorities and women always trail very far behind white men
Mhm.
in the workforce because of the way we sort of facilitate compensation and pay. So
Yeah.
Sasha comes for a job. Women tend to be more modest, whether she's a white woman, Hispanic woman, or black woman. Hi, your job says it's paying 100,000. That's what I want. Thank you for the 100,000. Men might say, yeah, well, I'm looking for 150, right? So our modesty also holds us back, but
Hmm.
also it's like we've been behind to begin with, so you can never catch up. Because if
Yeah.
I'm making 100,000, I might say, oh, I just want to make 125,000, and the person says, well, our budget is 110, and you make 100,000, so 110 is good enough for you, right? So
Right.
that's where the pay transparency came in. You can't ask someone's salary, you can't, do all that stuff. Everyone knows it. People have been doing it forever, but companies have been getting around that too by putting on job descriptions, this job pays up to $1 million a year. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's very fresh. It's very fresh.
What I love, we're having this conversation because what it says to me is even if that goes away as federal law, organizations can still do it. Right? It is
Right.
up to them if they want to continue to show
Everything
that
we're talking about
transparency.
is the
Right.
same. And that what
Everything.
that's right. A good company, great. You're like, you know what? No one has to tell me what to do. I'm going
Right.
to do it on my own.
Right.
Agreed.
And so I think this is an opportunity to just be mindful of what are the policies, procedures that are being impacted by Project 2025. And again, y'all, I have a list that we could go through. I'm looking at our time. We're not
I
going to get through
know.
everything.
I'm a
We may
talker.
do a
I
part
told
two to
you.
this. Right. Celeste and I said we're going to have to do a part two to this because it's so much information. But please be sure to do the QR code. That way we'll get your information. We'll try to connect with you on LinkedIn as well, so that
Yes.
if we continue to push more information out like this, we're trying to stay abreast of what is happening in this space. Like I said, there's just so much, there's so many moving parts. And so we want to make sure that you are informed about what is happening and what your organizations can do, even if some of this stuff goes away, right? Because you have agency in what you can do and how you want to show up as an organization, regardless of what guardrails are in place.
That's
So I
right.
do want to leave a little bit of time. If there are any questions that anyone has about what we have covered so far, please be sure to put that in the chat as well. We will try to get those on the screen. If not, we will follow up. So one of the questions, do you think that accountability lands and is perceived different through the lens of privilege? Ooh.
Ooh,
I'm
wow.
like, ooh, that's that with that
Oliver.
one.
Oliver, I love that.
You want to
You
tackle that one?
That's an interesting one. I think you should as
Yeah.
well. But I would just say potentially,
Yeah.
because we show up from the place that we are, right? And we show up in all contexts, whether it be work, professional life, and so if we show up from the place that we are, and we're entitled because of the race that we were born into, and that knapsack that we carry of entitlement that we're walking around in. Of course, that knapsack is going to enter its enter into the workforce as we are, into our leadership role or our management role, whatever we want to call it. So I think I would say yes. And accountability has been this sort of hard nut to crack, because it's had a negative connotation. And I think generationally, accountability, I will safely say, I think Gen Xers have been developed with the capital A on their chest, almost
Yeah.
to a fault. And
Yeah.
I don't think other generations have maybe been developed similarly. So there's something happening there around it. But Sasha, I'd love to hear what you had to say about that.
Yeah. You know what's, I don't want to say throwing me off, but I'm processing that lens of privilege, right? Because I think that there's a level of bias and a level of expectation that comes into how accountability shows up, right?
Mhm.
So if you already have a bias against this person, or you already are not necessarily feeling them, accountability will show up very differently for them than somebody that you love and trust and that you want to see exceed, right? So there's a level of privilege in that, because you can kind of give preferential treatment to those that you want, and we see it all the time in the workplace. And
And
so
hold them
one of
less
the
accountable, right? Yeah.
right, and how do you hold people accountable? And so y'all, you just, yeah, connect with me, because this article I got to put out tomorrow on accountability. It is not punishment. And so, in the conversation I had yesterday, it was asking the right questions, right? Part of that accountability is a partnership, because I want to see you succeed. I want us to get this task done. So what is it that prevented you from getting this task done? Is it something that I can do to support you, so that the next time that there's a barrier that you might be facing, that I can help remove? Right? You're now diving deep into what is the issue at hand, right? So that the next time the task gets accomplished. And
You
again,
know,
it's not necessarily the how, it's we want to see you succeed in getting it done. And
yeah,
so it's how are you supporting other people in that? And that's what accountability looks like for me. And when I talk about it from a lens of psychological safety, that's the approach. It's how do I coach someone in this so that they can
yeah.
achieve that task? Or if something goes wrong, they're not afraid to say something's going wrong, I need help.
I think the privilege piece is really interesting. I do think I would need to ruminate on that even more. But I
Yeah.
think it's more from a standpoint of generational. I go back to that because I do think there's a recalcitrance sometimes that I see in the workplace from individuals. And I don't know if I understand what it's really rooted in. There's this expectation of everything moves fast and titles and growth and promotions and without the accountability of hard work, right? So I think it's rooted in so many different things. It's a
Mhm.
hard one, Balava, I think was the question. It's a very, very good question to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that microwave mentality.
Yeah.
Instantly, instantly, instantly. Are there any other questions that we didn't capture?
Someone asked about a part two. I love that. I would totally be down. That was Allison. Put it up again. Yeah, I think we should. There's so much good stuff to talk about, and if you guys are into it, I'm totally into
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And I think, as things start to evolve and shape with this new administration, we will see what this looks like, right? They're starting to get a little bit of pushback. So we'll see. Our efforts to enhance diversity.
Excellence. That's right.
Right. There's this misnomer that you are sacrificing excellence and um excellence when you have people of color, right? But when you look at the most educated group in America, the Black women, yet nobody wants to look at us for anything. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think part of what is going to happen, even if these quote unquote DEI efforts go away, the talent is going to be needed, and we're going to need to look at tribal colleges and women's colleges and HBCUs and HSIs and all of these other places and trade schools and all of these other places to get
Everywhere.
the talent
Yeah.
because it is going to be needed. And so it's going to force you to have to look at these other places that people felt, oh, well, maybe it's not, top tier. We got some top tier folks that went to top tier places that we already know about nothing. So we need to remove that from our thought process that these schools produce the best people, because clearly we see that that is not necessarily the case. And I
Oh
will
yeah.
leave that
We,
there.
that's been proven. Ask any talent acquisition person.
I will
Yeah,
leave
that
that.
that falls at the wayside. I think so.
Yes. So Celeste, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the group before we head out?
Yeah, I think look, it's we have to build the bridges we walk on it here with this stuff. And it's complicated stuff. And I think, we handle it with kid gloves. I take human resources, human capital very, very seriously. And we have a huge task to really be in support of those folks. And the best we can do as HR practitioners and DEI leaders is to educate ourselves, and collaborate with one another. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning. I think collaboration is key, right? So, hit me up, hit Sasha up, everyone. It's like thinking partners, right? We can come through this together and really come out better and stronger and faster on the other side. Because all the minds that we put together. So I think, I've been thinking about these sort of think tanks lately, and really bringing people together to move content forward in support of the whole. The workforce is changing right now. We are in a time where it's the changeover, and what are we changing over to is the question. I'm someone who likes to analyze a lot, and I'm not clear at all. But I hope that we can do it together.
Absolutely. And what I will say to everyone, if you have followed me for any time, DEI After Five, we've been having these conversations for like the last year and a half. So go back and listen to some past episodes, because we have been touching on these topics and, what it looks like if DEI was to go away, because the work is going to continue to happen. And so I also say, stay connected, stay informed, be in community with the others that are kind of in this space with the same thought process, but also those that will challenge you, because those that will challenge you will help you come up with some great ideas to kind of get around and really maneuver in this space, because there is a lot that is going to be unknown. But what we do know is that we can do all of this together collectively.
That's
So I
right.
want to thank Celeste for being here. I am so
Thank
excited that
you.
we were able to pull this together. I want to thank everyone that was been able to join. Again, scan the QR code so we can get your information, so that we can keep you informed of everything that we are doing, as things progress, what we will need to do to continue to move in community together. And as always, thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of DEI After 5 Live. And until next time, have a good one.